Hey everybody, welcome back to another deck deep dive. I got bribed to go for the Scandinavians this time around, so let's get into it. Of course, Scandinavia is actually the first coalition we're going over, I just realized, consisting obviously of three nations: Denmark, Sweden, Norway. Honestly, one of the most interesting coalitions. None of these coalitions are nations are individually particularly strong. They might excel at one thing or another where they can potentially hold their ground compared to proper coalitions or nations. But they all have some pretty big holes individually, and I think they complement each other decently well. Plus, the coalition itself is still very strong, but also still has some noticeable holes, especially in the tank tab. I think it's a very well designed, very fun coalition that obviously has, or at the very least had, some overtuned stuff. Shows that some, decks can be very strong while still having holes. Either way, let's take a look at the good stuff, shall we? Availability bonus here is, I think, just 10%. Or is it maybe even 15? Let's go back. Looking at seeing the 23 infantry per card makes me think it's 15 actually. And I should probably know this, but it is 15, yeah. Interesting. But of course, it means you only get an additional unit from stuff that is 4 per cards onwards. So your infantry CVs are still just 3 per card. But you do notice it on the APC FVs like this, which is quite a good CV, by the way. Okay, infantry CVs. I think nothing particularly special. Obviously, of note is that the Danish and Norwegian ones have MG3s, which are the best MGs you can get on shock CV infantry. With a small caveat, that is the East German infantry CV. Technically, I wouldn't classify that as a better MG. However, since the East German CV is shock, it comes. The MGs get better stats, right? Better accuracy. So technically, it's a better MG in that sense. But if those were shock, or if the East German ones were aligned, then the MG3 would be better. Either way, that's mostly irrelevant. The main thing that really matters, if at all, on infantry CVs are the transport options. Obviously, if you've ever played them, Scandinavia doesn't really have particularly strong helicopters. They don't have any transport helicopters with something bigger than a 7.62 MG. Actually, I think no, we have miniguns somewhere, probably on the Swedish frogs or whatever they have. But practically speaking, their armament is irrelevant. So if you want something in a helicopter, i.e. fast, you get the Lynx, which is small, which means it has good acceleration and deceleration, 6 HP, so it doesn't get one shot by 5 HE missiles and 300 kmh. Pretty nimble, pretty fast, pretty good. Or obviously just a basic 10-point APC that's very fast, or even a 5-point truck. TGB, worth noting, the only 5-pointer that has actually pretty good off-road speed. Still, you probably do not want to use that for your CV, because both the infantry tab and recon tab have some pretty good units available where you might want to use the transport. As when it comes to vehicle CVs, you get some basic Jeeps. Obviously, you get a 100-point variant, which on Blue 4 basically always is the 55 kmh off-road speed, and the 110-point variant with 95 in this case. You also get the non-transport version of the TGB 13, which has 105 and 100 kilometers off-road speed, but is also only 400 kilometers autonomy. And in some rare situations, that might actually come back to bite you. So honestly, if you want to use a Jeep CV, just eat the 5 more points and get the one with slightly better autonomy, honestly. APC wise, we have something with 1 armor and a Browning. I don't really see a reason to use this. You have a 2 front, 2 side, the good old M577. But usually you're just best off using this. By the way, in case you're wondering, this comes up every now and then. Just like with the Recon variant. Where's the autocannon? This is actually on purpose, as in, this is not a mistake by Eugen. As far as I know, both the Recon and the command variant have this, so have a dummy gun, so they are not easily distinguishable between the IFV variant and the non-IFV variant. So it is correct that despite the model, they only have an MG. Either way, 130 points with 5 front, 3 side, very good HE protection, and even 2 top and 2 rear armor, right? So, incredibly tanky. Not quite on par with the Israeli Achzarit, of course, but and with the availability bonus, you get 5 of those. Incredibly good CV, so you can get a very solid CV setup like this, right? You get a tanky CV that is still affordable and has decent availability, and an infantry CV, right? Obviously, doesn't not quite as tanky as a tank CV, but when you're at this armor level, unless you're getting actually shot at by a proper tank or something, this versus a chieftain or something, not that big of a deal. Plus, you have very good off-road speed. Yeah, if you want something even tankier, technically there's the SCRV, but for 20 points more, you get worse availability, 2 fewer per card, and worse off-road speed. And while you get the gun, you're still usually better off just using this, I'll be honest. And of course, various supply, helos, and trucks. Of course, keep in mind, especially the cheap supply helicopters are incredibly point inefficient, right? 5 points more, you get 100 less supply compared to a truck, right? So, as usual, I don't really recommend using helicopter supplies unless it's for a certain strat or a certain map, of course, right? Because you can actually get much closer to the front line with these, much safer, also much harder to spot because they're not flying in the air. So, yeah, usually just better. Despite again, unless you're playing on a very large map or something, they're very often not actually faster, these supply helos. Especially when you combine it with the fact that you might have to, because you want to land this somewhere safe, you might have to then even like travel back with even further back with the damaged units to get repaired, etc., etc. You get the point. All right. Possibly the strongest tab that Scandinavia has. Laguna, very good 10-point infantry. Obviously, just a basic law, but MG3 and battle rifle, you basically can't ask for anything better. And thankfully, in a sense, you have the basic law, because otherwise they'd cost 15 points like the West German Jäger. Very good 5-pointer as well, with 2 front, 2 side armor and a 50 cal and decent speed, which means that it's very good spam infantry. 2 front, 2 side, of course, means that you need 16 AP heat to one-shot and 20 AP kinetic to one-shot, respectively. With 1 armor, it's 10 AP each, right? And against autocannons and such, also a lot more survivable. It's exactly what you'd want from a 5-pointer. And the Browning Force means decent fire support. Obviously not an individual one, it's not going to do that much, but especially when spammed. But Mega Base, they are alright, like infantry grinders, if you will. But 30 points for a 15-man squad that only has a Carl Gustav M2 is a steep price, right? It doesn't offer, like, you have to pay at least 40 points, at which point you can almost get two squads. Almost is maybe a bit of a stretch, but for 10 points more, you get 2 squads of these guys, for example. There's just no real purpose for them in this deck at the very least. Some decks might love to have that, but this one, you never see them for good reason, because for the same price, you get the same squad with an RX, right? I don't think I need to tell you that 25 AP at 1000 meters range is ridiculously good. It is guided, and sometimes that is annoying, but that is such a worthwhile trade-off with the AP and range you get. Also, it travels very, very fast, so it's almost fire and forget. It does happen that despite it being so fast and needing such a low time to travel, it does actually sometimes, rarely happen, that you will lose line of sight in the middle of it, or get stunned or something in the middle of it and lose guidance. But again, very much a worthwhile trade, and between you and me, they should probably be 35 points. They have solid transport options. The NO variant of the XA186 with 2 front and 2 side as well, for no downside. Well, the downside being it isn't amphibious anymore, but you don't lose any availability. So again, ridiculously strong card. FKP, they they get the PT 5-point truck, because otherwise they wouldn't have any ground transports from Eugen. Yeah, they're okay. They got buffed to 30 points. Basically to make up for the fact that the transport options are horrible. You get them in support or something, which is fun. So in like blue support, which is a solid deck actually. You get like some decent special force options. The squad itself is actually pretty decent, right? Sure, it doesn't have any flashy weapons. It has an assault rifle, which is good on elites. Carl Gustav M3, which isn't great, but it has very good. It's like very good all purpose that you'd want usually for your high end special force to have like an Eric's, an AT-12T, a Panzerfaust 3, a Vampire or something like that, right? It doesn't have that, but still the range and accuracy it's quite good on a Carl Gustav M3. I mean, to me, unless you're fighting against like crazy good special forces, you will win pretty much any one-on-one fight against other infantry. It's fine. FSK are basically Falski Mega 90, but elite. However, they're only 10 men, which means fewer Erics. They're actually the same speed because Falski Mega 90 are light infantry, and light infantry get a 5 kmh speed boost. They have better infantry DPS, but they cost more while having fewer men. And the extra HP really help on Falski Mega because they're such a powerhouse defensively with the Erics being such a huge threat. So being able to tank a lot more and getting out a lot more often when damaged, so valuable. Being cheaper, and they're still very, very good against infantry and higher availability per card. Like, the FSK are by no means bad, right? A lot of decks would kill to have that squad, but Falski Mega and Anya are just even better for what they do. That said, though, you're not like suddenly like building a horrible deck if you use FSK instead of Falski Mega. But I'd just say that or argue that Falski Mega 90 again basically does do the same job but better. Gewehrman and Gewehrman 90. Kind of the Black Sheep is maybe an exaggeration, but you don't really see them a whole lot, and that however, does not say anything about their quality. Gewehrmen are essentially carbon copies of Dragona. Battle Rifle, M72, MT3. Their comparative downside is they don't get a 5-pointer with 2 front or side armor, or even more. They get the XA line. You do see them actually pretty frequently in like Blue Moto, because of the XA1 and 6-0, for example. It's a pretty solid option. 5-pointer is just a basic 5-pointer. Basic M113 with 1 armor and a 50 cal. They get the M135, which is actually quite solid. It is very glass cannony, but it does have the Marder 1 or PvP autocannon with like 100 RPM and lower accuracy and range, but 100 RPM. And at 10 points, with a 10-point squad, that has some very high DPS. But like I said, it's also very squishy. And with meta these days very much revolving a lot around the Recon fighting vehicles. Marder 2s you see very often, like AMX 13s, Marder 2s, AMX 10s, stuff like that. Heavier IFVs. They get picked off very fast, so you gotta be careful when you use them. You also lose a bit on availability, which is a shame, but the DPS that they can put out, the infantry itself also is very, very high. You just gotta be careful because they're not really a battle taxi in a sense that you can just literally drive them to the front line, because that's the stuff you don't want them to get picked off, right? Because that essentially transformed them into a different role compared to like the Dragon and the 5-pointer. Yeah. The 90s variant is basically only ever seen if you want a CV90 with the 10-man infantry squad inside. Gewehrman 90 are not that great. They are the perfect showcase of their weaponry being so good that the M72 A4 Law then puts them at 15 points. Whereas other A4 Law squads are still 10 points, like Rovite 90, for example. CV90 is one of the best IFVs in the game. Like, just period. It is incredibly versatile. Tanky and speedy optics. It's like a baby Marder 2 in a sense. Very, very good. Okay, baby is maybe an exaggeration. It's more like the Hachiku. Shiki is the baby Marder 2, but it's like a little brother of the Marder 2. Very good IFV. But also, you don't really see it often because you don't have the squads you'd really love to have with them. And the infantry tab in Scandinavia is very competitive. So a squad or squad combination with the transport just being solid or good is honestly not good enough to be put in here very often. That doesn't mean, of course, it's bad by any means. And I'd like to run that sometimes. But they don't quite mesh with each other very well, because when you are getting such an expensive squad, IFV, you want it to come with a squad inside that has decent individual impact. Prime example, and I'm gonna spoil a bit, is for example the SCRF 9040 with RBS 56, or the SCRF 9040 with RBS 90, or the Bradley M2 with the Stinger squads. Marder 2, sorry, Bradley with Stinger squads, or the Marder 2 with Panzergrenadiere 90, right? Panzergrenadiere 90 carrying a 24 AP anti-tank weapon, right? Protecting the Marder 2 in force, for example, from tanks. Gewehrmann 90 don't really offer that. Gewehrmann 90 do offer a meat shield, but it's not quite enough, because you're so expensive that you already want to have your meat shield with something else usually. And the CV90 doesn't have enough DPS on its own to where 110 HP squad, in my opinion, is enough, right? It's not like a Merkava 2A situation. Again, this doesn't mean this is bad by any means. It's just not good enough. You also got helicopters, but usually, like, the helicopters are more expensive than the squad itself and do nothing after unloading, right? Almost nothing. Hammersmen, not very good. They're one of the worst reservists in the game, right? You pay 20 points for a 15-man squad. The MG is absolutely horrible. Like, let me show this to you. Again, one of the few situations where I think the rate of fire is very misleading. Usually on MGs, it is relatively consistent in the sense that comparative examples are decent. But in this case, I think, if I remember correctly, it's not the case, right? Like Hammersmen, their MG, the KG, has a rate of fire of 40. What do the and what does the MG3 have? A 60, right? 50% lower. I guess, maybe I might be wrong. Maybe they fixed it. I think it was maybe an issue in the past, but I guess it is relatively representative. But still, right? You have lowest veterancy, so you get no bonus. You get panicked instantly, take ages to recover. You have no speed. Your primary weapon is basically useless. Your miniman is actually kind of okay. 14 AP and 20 RPM at 25 meters range. Basically a better law. But you pay 20 points for a squad that is really slow, has horrible DPS. And yeah, right? If you just want a squad to tank for you and die for you for the same price, you can get 2 squads of LHV, right? Which gives you double the HP and 2 transports, and a transport actually has a 50 caliber. In this case, it doesn't. So, yeah. Oh, no, okay. They're not double the HP, never mind. Because these guys are 15 men. But you get double the targets. On paper, you do get a lot more value per card, but that's not great. That's just not very good. I'd rather, if you want to do that, take these guys instead. The transport does only 5 HP, keep in mind, and has no weaponry whatsoever. But I get an MG3, which is miles better than the KG. Actually has the same stats as line infantry, so it's not that bad. They still get panicked instantly. I used to try to give them a shot, right? Defensively in towns against infantry, right? They're still not very good though. They're just reservists that just get panicked too easily, take forever to recover. They're slow, immobile. They're just useless against vehicles because again they get panicked instantly and have horrible accuracy usually on their AT weapons. They're both not particularly good, honestly. One of the few just duds in the infantry tab of Scandinavia. Ilstadagruppe, also get a good 5-pointer, by the way. Pretty much any Danish infantry squad, except for the reservists in the FKP, I think, do. But you only get 2 cards, which is a shame. In Scandinavia, not that big of a deal. Well, and it is in Mech, though. But you really feel it in when playing Denmark. Ilstadagruppe are your basic Carl Gustav fire support squad. Fifth squads are always decent. They also get an 85 Baron with the M3. I'm never too sure which I prefer, because the extra range and AP, but especially the extra range, is very, very neat. You also pay, like, if you include a transport, 1 third extra, right? And sometimes you don't really care about the range or so much about the AP because you might, depending on what you buy them for, you already one-shot or double tap stuff either way. Usually you don't see them very often in unspec, but in mech you definitely you often see a card of them. They're quite neat. They're just solid. Fist quads like these, like Hagusa fist quads, not groundbreaking, but very, very neat. Like they're just nice to have, and in certain situations they can be very powerful. Pustjäger, one of the worst special forces in the game, honestly, right? 35 points, a battle rifle. Well, it says assault rifle, but it's basically a battle rifle. I don't know why it says assault rifle. It's horrible on elites, right? It has 80% base accuracy, which might sound good until you realize that A, with the veterancy bonus, you get such a huge bonus that you essentially get over 100%. And then you consider that very often you're fighting in forests or towns where range scaling is a thing, which also essentially gives you accuracy. But because battle rifles trade accuracy for rate of fire, you get accuracy you can't use, but you still lose the rate of fire. So you get you pay for a lot of stats that you basically can't use. Technically, of course, it means that when you're panicked or shaken, you keep your high accuracy up, but you'd much rather have their higher DPS from the get-go, which then means you kill faster, and that means you don't get panicked or shaken in the first place, right? They get a very basic MG and a basic Cargos FM2. They're just incredibly bland and they have nothing going for them, really. Like, sure, they're 15 men, but who cares when your weaponry is so basic? The 90s variant is better. Still only a basic MG, but at least they get an assault rifle, which helps. And they get the AT-12T, of course, which is a humongous 25 AP at 20 RPM. Base accuracy at 50% is not too great. Sure, when you comp, you still, thanks to the veterancy bonus, you got decent accuracy. But you still notice the low base accuracy, especially when you're firing at max range, and even more so when you're not calm anymore. You don't see them particularly often, because usually you have your Erics for your heavy AT duty, right? When you see them though, they're not bad by any means. They're highly specialized though, of course. Well, mostly. You really, if you buy them, you get them for the AT-12T, right? They're not gonna win any prizes for the anti-infantry DPS. Their transport options are not particularly great. You see them in mech sometimes because you can get them there in helicopters. By no means a must have. Yeah. LHV, basic reservists, but that's good enough sometimes, right? As you still see them now and then, despite Dragona and a 5-pointer being such a good option, because sometimes just being even cheaper is just very helpful, right? And just having a lot of bodies and units on the board, even if they die very fast, can be very valuable. Live Garden, incredibly solid shock squads. 20 points, which is relatively cheap, but still get a cargo stuff, so most IFVs aren't really a threat to them, within anti-tank range. Battle Rifle is good on shocks. MG3 is very, very good, and they get a good 5-pointer. Like, unless you want, like, specifically a shock squad with an IFV or something fancy with your shock squad, they're incredibly good, just all-purpose shock squads. Good for grinding, good for, like, dealing, and still a threat to vehicles. A good all-around purpose, yeah. I think that's all that needs to be said. I think that describes them very well. If you've got an 85, then get the good stuff M3 for extra range and AP. Still very, very solid. You don't see the 85 very often, because at that point they're a head more expensive, they're a bit more specialized for AT, and then you usually have your fast Mega 90 around for that. You might see them in mech, because in mech your fast Mega 90 only come in helicopters. So that's where they will have, you might see them more often. But then again, usually I want to avoid using one armor transports, right? Especially for shock squads, and then maybe you're using it for the Dragona already. So that limits, especially when mech, your lift guard usage, at least in my experience. Hamlet is what is this, like a red eye or something? No, red eye has a different symbol. Whatever this is, or supposed to be, it's not a good man pad. Then you have a C Stinger, which is a C Stinger. It's solid all around. It's just a good man pad. That's all that needs to be said. RBS 70 is fine. And the RBS squads are 5 men, which helps to not die immediately. But it also means they have worse stealth. So helicopters could spot you easier when you shoot at them and might actually kill you as a result. So keep that in mind. Also carry a bit more ammo, right? 8 instead of 6 missiles. They have only 4 HE, which is also something you have to keep in mind. RBS 90, of course, with just a tad more range and accuracy. They have, I mean, I say tad more range, but compared to something like Stingers, they have very good anti-helicopter range, of course, right? Which is why you still see them very often. One downside is that the Swedish manpad squads, and usually you see manpads in mech or moto, but especially in mech. The Swedish infantry tab doesn't have 5-point transport, or even 10-point transports for mech, right? They have 10-point wheels transports, and the cheapest track transport is 15 points, right? Which can be very, very annoying when playing armored or mech. They get the SRF 9040, which is a very common combination if you run those manpads in unspec or mech. Which is, yeah, but of course makes them a bit more expensive. Norlandsjäger, one of the squads that does get the TGB 13 for some reason, which is of course a very good 5-point transport, and the squad itself is also very good. 25 points with the battle rifle, 15 HP, also 30 kmh because light infantry, just a basic MG, but they're still decent against infantry, and a very long range recoilless rifle. Incredibly good defensively, similar to the Feinskirchen 90, thanks to the 15 HP, very hard to dislodge, especially early on like lower intensity front lines or parts of the front line. Hard to dislodge, very impactful, lots of coverage, right? So your opponent can't just ignore them, right? If you put a rifleman squad in a town, your opponent can just drive around the town with their vehicles, right? With Fallschirmjäger 90, and a lot more so with Norlandsjäger, can't really afford to do that. So they can be quite like the not stopgap, that's a different thing, but a wall for your opponent. It's a minuscule wall, so to speak. Even despite the TGB, the XA is still a solid transport. But you see them pretty frequently in Scandi, and they're very good in like motorized openers. Get a town fast, put them in there, and then especially moto transport or other wheel transports will just get one shot, right? So very, very solid. I think Panzerritte is how you're supposed to pronounce them. I don't know if that's correct. Basic ones, ugh. I mean, Kargusev is fine for 15 points, but basic MG, and they are an option, or, usually, okay, let's be real here, right? If you have the option for both of them, you're gonna run for the 90s because the 84 is just gonna be much better. You lose 10% accuracy, but 1 extra AP, and the 20 RPM, a lot more worthwhile. But the rest of the weaponry is the same. You don't get them in a 5-pointer, so you can't, use them for the same role as for Rifleman 90, which would be like cheap anti-tank, although you do have the fists squads for that. SCRF 90 is an option if you want the SCRF 90 somewhat cheap. Also, again, just like the CV90, not available with any 10-point infantry. And that's usually the only time you see them. If you want an SCRF 9040 with a 10-point squad, works better than the Gewehrman 90 with the CV90 because you have an 84, which is more impactful than the M72A4 Law. But also the SCRF 9040 is, in my opinion, a bit worse. For one, it has 1 less armor. The autocannon also has lower rate of fire. It does have more range, but lower rate of fire. And, higher suppression, to be fair. But I'd say the Bushmaster 2 is the better autocannon. Where were we? RBS 56, basically a must take, especially when you consider the tank type. They do like range that other HTM squads have, but they make up with the AP. They have also great availability. 5 HP means a die is not nearly as fast when sitting in towns, but at the same time, low range and most importantly, lower stealth. Because of the 5 men and not 2 men, they're only good and not very good. Means they get spotted easier in towns. It's a double-edged sword, but the 5 HP makes up for the stealth because, again, they can just tank a couple of tank shots. And yeah, they hit like a truck. SCRF 9040, very common to see with them, or the XAs, or the other 10-point transports, but usually the XA because it has the best off-road speed. IBS 70 and we have seen that with the Swedish ones. Mark II is basically the same with more range. It's basically in between the 70 and the 90. It has the range of the 90, but the accuracy of the 70. If you have access to the 90, there's no reason to go for the 70 Mark II, of course. Availability and price are both the same. Yeah, they only get basic transports. Stormer are the same as Livgarden, except you get Norwegian transports, which means no 5-pointer that is like great, but you do get a good XA, so they're very, very commonly seen in Blue Moto. They're pretty much the best all-purpose shock squad you get there, I think. Well, I mean, now with Italy out, maybe not so much anymore, but Italy doesn't get a 2-armor wheeled transport, so there's still that. And the 2-armor wheel transport that the Commandos 90 of Ansa get is a prototype, so Blue Motor doesn't get that either. But same goes for them, right? Very solid loadout, pretty affordable. You get them with the CV90, but again, not the greatest combination because Carl Gustav M2 is not that impactful. So again, one of the reasons you just don't see the CV90 that often. Some Ingenieur are the same as the Stottergruppe, except same transport option. These guys you might see pretty frequently as well together. Like they work very well. Some Ingenieur to deal with like IV spam, which most IVs are actually pretty good against the NM because most IVs you see have more armor and not rarely better autocannons, at least against vehicles. So they can deal with that at close range, and the NM 135s just murder infantry. The 90s variant get a CV90, and now you get like an Eric's with your CV90, but an Eric squad that has only 5 HP, right? It's a solid combination and probably my preferred CV90 card that you have. But the Eric's fist squads just aren't that great because unlike Carl Gustav or other fist squads, they don't get rid of fire boost, right? There's still only a 5-second reload time, which is 12 RPM, which is actually pretty good for non-fist squads, but that's the same as normal Eric squads, right? So they don't really gain any real boost. Also, still 60% accuracy, whereas usually you get 70% accuracy. And the HE round things are not particularly great. Honestly, they're probably better, at least in this combination. If they had no HE rounds, so they couldn't, so you would also always be forced to use the Erics on vehicles, and you couldn't bait them with infantry. And then you get the flamers, which are fine. Flamers are always good, as like you have the option to take them at least. So there you go. Although honestly, you might want to use them if you're playing mech or something, but you have such good shock squads, you don't really need them in your unspec decks. Honestly, maybe support is the strongest tab. Amos, oh boy. In case you don't know, of course, it does fire 2 rounds at the same time. The model does not lie. But the thing eats supply like there's no tomorrow. It's 40 per shot. Does it show here? Yeah, it doesn't. Okay, it does eat 40, so practically 80 per shot. It says salvo length 6, but I think it means it fires essentially 3 times 2 shots, right? I think that is somewhat misleading if I'm not mistaken. But it eats ammo like there's no tomorrow. Same supply cost as other 5HE motors, but pretty much double the rate of fire. Not technically, right? It has a higher shot reload, but if you've ever like supplied mortars, because mortars shoot very fast, right? Like yes, the individual shot doesn't cost nearly as much as like proper artillery, but they fire so fast. The mortars themselves are much cheaper, so you get more of them. Resupplying mortars is very expensive, and the Amos is like the epitome of that, right? That thing is so expensive to maintain. It uses up its own ammo very fast. Like even if you only want to smoke with it, right? If you just use one salvo, you're gonna use 6 rounds for essentially 3 smoke clouds, 3 big smoke clouds to be fair. That's already like 1/7 of your ammo. Like you get 7, assuming you don't micro, which is gonna make your smoke counts less consistent because you get fewer rounds, and if you get like a bit of variance in where they land, etc., etc., it's not a lot of smoke per mortar, so you have to resupply or buy a new one. buy a new one. Well, the thing is 65 points compared to like 30 or 40 points of other mortars. Resupply, well, gonna have to resupply that often, right? So usually, if you use it offensively, it's also very accurate, and it can dish out a lot of damage. But again, if you run artillery for damage, while the Amos is very good, you usually run the beacons. And running both beacons and Amos, I would not suggest doing unless you want to run 3 FOBs. And honestly, that can be a valid strategy, especially in team games, right? But you just gotta build your deck accordingly, and I'd suggest 3 FOBs. And yeah, that's like the highest DPS, like actual damage output more, like accuracy as well. Yeah, beacons. Both have obviously, well, not obviously, but you probably know they have incredibly high DPS. Or rate of fire, I should maybe say. The main difference between them is of course, the dispersion and the aim time. The 1C has much shorter aim time, but a beacon, but they still have a salvo rate of 30, right? So, well, I'd always, if you have the option, suggest to go for the beacon 1C. One thing to keep in mind is with the beacon 1A, if you just shift queue your fire position commands, right, you technically, after the first aim time cycle, have the same overall rate of fire over like multiple minutes than the beacon 1C. If you just want to use like constant fire. But of course, the beacon 1C, because of the aim time, is a lot more versatile, and with a higher accuracy, it's also like better for sniping certain positions. At the same time, it's not quite as accurate as something like an Ace 90 or a Paladin. Like it's one, let's say, step less accurate. So for like towns that are like 3 or 4 town blocks, or like some patches of forests that aren't just like a forest line, it's still inaccurate enough that with a high volume of fire, it can like bog down a relatively large amount of relatively large area, right? But it also eats supply like there's no tomorrow because of its rate of fire, right? And the beacon 1A essentially costs half the supply if you look at it, right? At the supply cost per shot. So there is an argument to be made to run a beacon 1A over a 1C, but again, I'd always go for the 1C. But mech has access to the 1A, of course, right? Or armored. No, mech has, and armored has the 1C as well. Or, blue mixed, right? Because the 1C is a prototype. So, but the 1A is still a very, very solid option. Now, no, okay. I was thinking if we already had like a nation that has this available, but no, we haven't. This thing, maybe unless you're playing support or like a Cat C, then Danish deck or something, of course, right? You never want to really put into your deck because it does very, very little. However, and I say this every time that I go over this unit, there's one scenario where this is actually a very, very like almost S tier unit for its role. That is when you want to protect like a severe something in a deep forest from helicopters. Because you can just fill a forest with those things. And they do actually have a pretty high rate of fire, right? Let me show that to you. GMC. 151 per minute. That is higher. Shot reload of 0.2, salvo length of 40. That is the same rate of fire as a Tunguska. Technically, even like with a higher salvo length, even longer, like in salvo at least, right? At 10 points a pop. Of course, it has only 0.75 AG, not 1. It doesn't have the AoE tag as well, although that does not matter against any helicopters, I think. And only 10% accuracy. But it's 1/10 of a Tunguska M, or 2/15 of a Tunguska. Oh, no, sorry, no, the Tunguska M is not even 100 points anymore. It's like 85, right? I don't know, 2/17th of a Tunguska M. But you can just fill the forest. And the thing is, right, if there's like a hind flying over a forest, there's a single spec, the hind will usually win because of helicopters being stupid. But if you have like a dozen of those, the hind will kill one and the others will just instantly stun and then like after like 2 seconds kill it, right? These things, if they essentially get quote unquote undisturbed in range of helicopters, and helicopters can't break like line of sight immediately, they will just, like, 4 of these will just murder that helicopter, man. And for that very specific role, they're essentially S tier. Because to protect against helicopters in these situations, you usually want as many targets as possible. And for the cost, I'm not sure if there's anything with better DPS against helicopters at that range, right? And because it's forests, right, you don't really get the high range anyway versus helicopters. So their maximum range being only 1225 is irrelevant. Thanks for coming to my TED Talk. This thing is horrible. Abysmal rate of fire, right? LV. Do I still have the thing still? Yeah, I have it. 37, like a short reload of 1.6. It shoots every 1.6 seconds. That is so long. It is so long with horrible accuracy, right? As well. Don't bother with this, man. Werk 40 is kind of okay, but also pretty high short reload, right? 40% accuracy in range is fine, but very high short reload, right? 0.8 is very high. Like, what you should look for is at least like 0.4 for your all rounds back, unless there's something special about it, like the PGC 88 with like 7 front armor or something, right? Like a Gepard has 0.4, Pivots has 0.4, right? That's what you should like look out for. LVKV90 is a bit different, right? Doesn't have the high rate of fire itself, even lower of only 1 second, but it has pretty high accuracy with 1.5 HE. So 1.5 HE makes up for it to an extent. And of course, it is multi-role. It has 1925 range against ground targets, which, even if it was HE alone, would be pretty solid as like infantry support. And of course, 3 AP rounds. With 5 armor, it will like mulch many IFVs without really getting damage, especially when you're fighting at max range. So, very, very good all-purpose unit. Doesn't particularly shine against aerial targets, for its cost at least. But it makes up for its all-round purpose ability. Basic RV70 carrier, not really horrible. The main problem with this really is just the autonomy, right? If it had like 400 or 500 kilometers at least, especially with its horrible off-road speed, it would like actually be pretty okay. Hard to fit in, but like for the price, a mobile RB70 carrier that unfortunately only has a salvo length of 1 is still not really horrible in and of itself, right? Basic mortar, M109. I think we went over this in the US one as well. Pretty good if what you want to do is just keep a relatively large force, essentially the constant fire with 3 or 4 of those. But any howitzer is just going to compete with the beacon, even a beacon 1A, honestly. And there's just, unfortunately, just realistically, while this isn't bad, one of the things where it's like, there's no real reason to go for it. But again, if you just want to play something different, it's a solid option. 100.1 is just in a horrible, like, not like high rate of fire enough for the cost, not low aim time enough for the cost. It has not a whole lot of stuff going for it. It's an awkward spot. Because at that point, you're so close to the beacons, just go for the beacons. And in other decks, you go for M110s. 40-point Hog is funny. Very similar to the basic Cub M that some Red Formations get. Like 40 points for 9 HE is hilarious. And of course, in case you don't know, the way vetting up during combat works is it's essentially a mix between how much damage you deal, or especially if you kill something, right? Dealing damage also gives you experience, but obviously getting the kill gives you the most amount. I can't give you hard numbers because I don't have them. And of course, what matters is how much do you cost, and how much does the enemy unit cost that you killed or dealt damage to. If you have a low base cost, it means you need essentially less, or you get more XP from killing a high point unit. A Patriot killing a 100-point plane does not immediately level up, whereas this one killing a 100-point plane probably already gets 2 vet steps. Also depends on your base veterancy. The higher your veterancy, the more extra XP you need. But what I mean about that is, if you get 3 or something of those on the field, and you get a bit lucky early on and get some plane kills, and you have like a couple of those on veteran or elite even, you will then just start one-shotting planes, because the higher veterancy is, the higher your crit chance as well, right? And that is just so funny. I love that. And if you know beforehand you're playing against a deck or someone that just relies a lot on like the A10 War Thunder, the A10, the Warthog, the Thunderbolt, or the Su-25T, and you're playing on a relatively small map, or a map where you can get those relatively close to the front line because they don't have the best range against planes, right? And they're pretty slow. They're very good because those planes don't have the best ECM, and they have 9 AG, right? And you want very high AG missiles, ideally, against those planes. So getting 3 of those for 120 points is just so good against that. But of course, they do like the speed and range, so that's a bit. It can be awkward to use them. iHawk is just a 60-point iHawk is fine, and then the EOS Hawk is the same, but no radar, which is very neat. Especially because most of your like long range AA and specs and such are radar in this deck. So a lot of people use it. Makes you immune to the seed, of course. Doesn't make you immune to artillery, so keep that in mind, of course. But a very popular option for a good reason, right? And especially against US, where the A10 can very often be accompanied by a Raven or something, makes it much easier to deal with that, of course. M270 cluster, yeah, it's okay. If you want cluster artillery, it's fine. It's not very consistent, right? It can't keep up with this merge or even the Yugoslav one, although the Yugoslav one does not have the 10 seconds aim time that this one has. Yeah, I can't really give you like crazy numbers that are gonna help you a whole lot with the M270, the cluster variant. It's fine if you want cluster. Same M109s as well, basic mortars. Another RBS carrier. In this case, it's actually relatively fast. Sorry, has decent autonomy and is relatively fast, so there you go. NM145, kind of a meme. Sorry, NM45, not 145. Not the greatest sort of fire. No AP rounds. That's up the AoE tank though, but only 5 HP and no armor. It's funny, especially because there's a stabilizer. Don't expect it to deal with helicopters very well. It's probably kind of alright against ground targets because most specs have a relatively large radius for their AoE rounds to stun and such. But other than that, if you have the slot like in a mech deck or armor deck, I think get it in mech, yeah. It gives you some, even armor, yeah, it gives you some wheels. Well, I don't want to call it firepower, but it gives you some wheeled pew pew. Might be worth it, but not a fan personally. Noah is one of my favorite Hawks. Gives you the accuracy and range of a Hawk Whip 3. You don't get the helicopter range, but you're also cheaper. Yeah, I like it. It's a pretty good, like, anti-plane focused Hawk. As all Hawks, though, like low speed and no real armor, so that's always something you have to keep in mind. NASAMS got basically buffed. Technically, its DPS got nerfed, right? What happened with it was that it had well, for one, it got buffed because it has its aim time reduced from 1 second to 0.2 seconds, like all radar missiles, which is very, very good. It also had its shot reload reduced from increased from. Actually, I don't know what it was. Do you have old variants here? Oh god. What? Yeah. I can only view the old variant here. From 1.4 to 1.8. Well, let me just reload it. There you go, 1.8, which technically lowers its DPS. But then you have to keep in mind, right? It can get its first missile out 0.8 seconds faster, right? To make up those 0.8 seconds, or let me put it this way, right? The second missile comes out after 2 seconds, whereas before, the second missile came out after 2.4, right? So the first few missiles are still technically a higher DPS. The longer shot reload also means that it's easier to make sure that it doesn't waste its missiles as much. Yeah, it still has like very high DPS, being fire and forget, of course. 7 HE is very neat, means that critical hits with one-shot planes. Bust does have no armor and 5 HP. It's better to use against helicopters now thanks to its aim time buff, however. It's fun. I wouldn't say it's like meta / ideal, but it's by no means bad, okay? Just gotta be very careful with it because it's relatively low range for its like cost and like survivability stats, right? Just keep that in mind. Automatic, obviously, right? The GOAT. It got nerfed in last patch, but it's still very, very good. I don't know why I'm talking like this. Um, yeah. Planes still melt. Ground units will still melt. It is a lot less consistent against high ECM planes now, which is good. Because, like, the single automatic being basically guaranteed to kill like any single high-end plane even that flies over it was a bit ridiculous. Like, yes, specs tend to be a lot more consistent with their killing powers and like missiles, for obvious reasons, I think. But it was still ridiculous just how good it was. Um, it is still like a must take because it's so good, but it got its deserved nerf. But I don't think I really need to explain the automatic a whole lot, right? It has ridiculously high DPS against pretty much any target, at least any target that it can shoot at, right? Super heavy looking at you at at max range from like 2100 meters isn't not gonna care about you, obviously, right? But I don't think I need to tell you that. Another 40-point hog. We were talking about this. Yeah, we have Jeeps. They used to have stabilizers way back when, which was really good. But they're solid, right? Especially the 35.1, right? Not only does it have the better RPS, it's also twin, right? So it only has to reload after every second missile, which is huge. Because it means it can, if it hits both, at least one shot up to 1 salvo, I guess, up to 8 HP helicopters. Just honestly keep one thing in mind, right? It's only 35 points. Don't expect it to consistently like deal with every single helicopter on its own. I think sometimes it can be frustrating when your dedicated anti-air unit, which this is, dies or is unable to kill a single helicopter and then it dies. But also keep in mind, right, it's 35 points. It is dirt cheap, and especially when you look at the range and speed it offers, right? So just keep that in mind and consider using 2 stacks. Or if you're using only one on a part of the map, just make sure to have like in a position where it doesn't immediately get shot at by a helicopter when it should it not kill it, or just be at peace with what might happen. Tanks, there's a lot of like very mediocre tanks in here. The Centurion 84 millimeter isn't one of those, but it's a tank that you don't really need. Like fire support, this is mainly a fire support tank, right? Having 3G at 8 RPM, a 50 cal, and 9 front armor for 25 points make it a pretty solid fire support tank. It also has poor optics and not bad optics, right? Which makes it not quite as blind. There's actually quite a noticeable difference. But the deck doesn't really need it. Yeah, usually you have heavy IVs, you have MG3 infantry, you have your automatic, you have LVK Vinant, you have very good artillery, right? And usually you run some Recon fire support as well. So the tank type usually isn't really used for fire support. And even if you want one, there's an even better option than this, right? Which doesn't mean that this is like the Saturn 84mm is like the best tank for this, but I think it's a bit underrated for that role. And then you have like these two. Okay, I'll keep it short, right? They're again like in that situation where they don't really have a role. Too expensive to be fire support, too weak or unspecial. Like, if you're a 55-point tank like an M8 AGS with crazy rate of fire but 3 front armor, it's a different story. But usually tanks in this price range of these other Centurions, again, too expensive for their anti-infantry DPS to be used as infantry fire support, and then too weak or too blind to be used as like defensive units against on flanks where they will just get wrecked by Recon fire support. They fall into the category the 40-point Leopard, at least. Not amazing, especially because for the same price, the West German one has medium optics and is still not an amazing unit, but alright. It's like pretty good like fire support stats because it has the range, it has the accuracy and the 10 RPM at least, and the speed. Still though, it's not that great because it's like a single unit for 40 points that is not particularly tanky, so yeah. 65.105, sorry, 1A5. It's okay. Used to be meta way back when it was 60 points, but there were also other reasons for why it was meta. Nowadays, it's okay. Don't really see that sort of modo, but even then, they have this tank available at 12 per card. You probably don't need more. It's okay. Maybe in an armor deck you might see it, but again, 5 points more, you get 2 front armor and an additional AP, which is just worth a lot. I mean, technically, right, similar to the 84mm, for 10 RPM, 3 HE, right? That's 6 extra HE per minute, even higher accuracy, good speed, no browning though, which is not relevant, but again, there is some better option available. This one is fun. The one I know, like 45 points, but 15 AP at 1 step below max range. That's quite some AP output, especially at close ranges that you can get here. Obviously, it has only 8 armor, so at close range, it also will get one shot by tanks. But there's definitely some fun stuff you can do with this, right? Like if you compare this for 5 points or more, you get 3 AP, which is a lot. It's a fun little tank, which in armored maybe you can make some fun stuff with this. Another A5, and then the NO2 again, incredibly good upgrade. If you want, that's like the best, let's say, traditional medium tank, because the 103 line is just so special, that Scandinavia has, but it can't really go toe-to-toe with stuff like the Wilk, the M84A, the Leopard 2A1, the traditional medium tanks you see, so it's gonna really struggle against those targets. And with 12 front armor, it's also gonna get bullied by like Recon tanks, so like AMX-10s or Volcanics and such. Keep that in mind. It's not bad, but just really squishy. And 3 side armor is not a lot. I hate this tank, I hate this tank, I hate this tank. I think it's horrible. Like, yes, it's only 10 points. Yes, it has 2 armor. It only has 200 kilometers autonomy with pretty mediocre speed. It could be worse, admittedly, but mediocre. Has no range to speak of. 6 RPM with 2 HE and 4 AP. It has absolutely no. I don't know if there's any like vehicle with like a something that you could call a gun, right? I'm not talking about like MGs only or something, right? But anything that has like an actual gun. I don't know if there's any vehicle with worse DPS than this, like worse effective DPS. Like, look at the range as well, right? As if it was an odd. It's just so bad. I hate this unit because it's so bad. Admittedly, at 5 points, it might be OP, but it's so bad, this unit. It's a waste of points. I'd rather float the points this costs than buy this unit. M84A1, sorry, M48A1. If you want a fire support tank in your tank tab, this is what you'd go for. 388 RPM, Browning, 5 armor, 15 points is very good. You even come with trained base, not even rookie. It's solid. It's actually very good, in fact. Arguably, honestly, better than a Charioteer. The Charioteer has a step more range, but same armor and probably similar autonomy stats, but it doesn't have a Browning. Yeah, this is actually a very good fire support tank, but you still don't see it very often because the rest of the deck just already like kills anything at like long range. And the upgraded variant is just like really like for 10 points, you get like, you know, at different price ranges, it would be amazing for 10 points, but in this case, you don't really care about the AP. The suppression and presumably slightly bigger AoE is nice with the 105mm gun. The range is neat, of course, and the extra accuracy, but it's not worth like almost a second tank of that, right? Various Centurions, and again, same issues of the SDs. 105 is at a point where it's like a decent, like, not quite a medium tank at its price range, but like a solid, like all-purpose tank, if you will, like the 105. It lacks a bit of a speed, it's also bigger. Also doesn't have the RPM, but 70% base accuracy. It's a solid tank. Also the MGs, there's an issue with some of the Swedish KSPs. The 103D, 121, and the 105 have infantry stats instead of like the vehicle stat MGs, right? Like you see how, despite having the same range, right, against ground targets, not helicopters, so funnily enough, but against ground targets, same HE in suppression, there's different color coding, right? It's because the way color coding essentially works, as far as I know, is essentially compared to stats of its weapon category. The KSP on the 103C is in weapon category of basically vehicle MG3s, right? So the range and helicopter is not that great because something like a Browning exists or KPVT or whatever, right? Which I think is compared to. Right, if you compare this to the Browning, right? Browning sets are here green, HE and suppression are blue because it's much better here. Accuracy is suddenly orange because it's slower. You get the gist, right? Um, but in the case of the 103Ds and the 105s and the 121s KSP, this is infantry stats. And let me show this to you. Rate of fire is also different, as you might have noticed. So let's go to the 103C and the 103D, for example. This is so funny. As the KSP. So the 103D even shares the minimum range that the infantry variant gets, and has a different short reload as well. Even different supply cost. That is so funny. It is so irrelevant, practically speaking, but it's also so funny. Yeah. 103s, the D, I mean, obviously, there's like straight up 15 RPM, right? No magazine shenanigans, right? This mother trucker shoots every 4 seconds. Auto-loaded as well. So, you don't need to worry about your morale when it comes to the rate of fire, at least. Not aim time and accuracy. But of course, the entire tank needs to turn if it wants to shoot, which can be awkward. It needs to stop if it wants to shoot, which can be awkward. But at the same time, don't forget, or I say don't forget as if it's like common knowledge. One important thing that also shared by the Chimera, by the way. For one, in general, there's different turn speeds for different vehicles and tanks. For example, the Chieftains and Challengers turn a bit slower than other tanks, but the non-turret tanks, specifically the 103s and the Chimera, turn even faster. I think it's in the mobility type. It's the Thames Demitor, I believe, which is essentially the time it needs to, I don't know, do a 180 or something. It is essentially the lower the number, the faster it turns. So let's take a look at like a Leopard 2, which is pretty solid, I think, in that stat, which is 4. And let's take a look at the Chieftain, which, for example, is 7, right? Turns really slowly. Not the Marksman, by the way. Or the Challengers, I think not that fast either. Challenger 2 is a bit better. Leopard 2s are pretty fast. How did the T-72s, for example? T-72s are 5. These all the variants I'm looking at here. Also has pretty good acceleration and deceleration. 37 is very, so okay, deceleration is the same, but acceleration is pretty good. And that helps a bit, right? Again, something that the game doesn't show you, but is admittedly also not that important to know in all honesty, but, worth pointing out at the very least. But yeah, but if it gets fired, the stats speak for themselves. If it fires, the DPS is crazy good. Especially defensively, if there's like a push of cheap spam, that's ideal for it. Or in forests are like a bit of hit and miss, right? On the one hand, in forests, with the IP scaling and the 15 armor means you never get one shot by pretty much anything, but you get like 3 shots out before the opponent gets a second shot out. On the other hand, of course, with the low off-road speed, if the opponent is microing and paying attention, they can just reverse before you get your second shot on, right? Usually, if they're not, unless they're like really on point, you will often get your second shot out before the opponent manages to reverse, because acceleration and the opponent paying attention and slight input delay, blah blah blah, right? But it can still, of course, mean that the rate of fire is somewhat nullified. And of course, you can't shoot while turning around, while driving backwards. You can only shoot in front of you, so there are downsides, but attack move helps with it. And the 1-to-1 is a 2A4 with 4 extra AP. It's like the there's another tank with 19 armor and 23 AP. Which one is it? I forgot. Is it I think the C1 Ariete also has the same stats now. Yeah, it's the strongest tank you get. Kind of a must-have if you have it. Yeah. The stats speak for itself. Not quite a super heavy, doesn't have the armor for that, but it has the punch of a super heavy at least. Recon. Has some pretty solid options in there. Recon helicopters. I don't think I need to really go over the basic ones. Usually you see the Scout Defender because it's so cheap and fast, and has some FFARs to be a bit annoying. But the thing is also just the most important Usually, like the most important time for Recon helicopter is the opener to get information. What is my opponent? What is my opponent playing, and where are they pushing? Right. And of course, if they're so cheap, you can also get multiple for less points. And good optics are usually just as good as very good optics, or even exceptional for this purpose, because everybody will fast move and they'll be out in the open. So usually, even with good optics, you spot them pretty much at the same time, because when you don't spot them, it's because there's something in the way, and in that case, none of the optics will help, right? Technically, that's not entirely correct, but practically speaking, that's how it works. Yeah. And of course, it means that if you just want something on the flank to watch out for, you don't have to suddenly like pay 55 points, which is almost double the cost, right? Horrible accuracy, horrible rate of fire. It's not worth it. Has the armor, but it's not that important on Recon fighting vehicles. Usually, they get their survivability from their stealth and optics by like being able to shoot at threats earlier by spotting them earlier. Except for optics, is always tough to really ground optics tough to really make use of. You're better off using Recon Infantry because they can get closer to the enemy, and at this point, if you're getting much closer, that's worth more than having better optics. Let's give the other squad with TGBs, and usually where you see them the most, TGBs, especially like in mech or armored, where you don't get the traditional wheel transports, but the TGB gives you a very fast option nonetheless. And they're pretty solid, right? SMG and the basic MG aren't ideal, but we got a Cargos of M2, and usually that is more important because you don't want them to get flushed out by basic vehicles, or you want them to be able to kill enemy Recon vehicles that might try to sneak through, and the Carl Gustav is one of the best things you get on Recon Infantry. The Jäger Special Forces usually go for Jäger 90 because they're essentially straight up better MG, better anti-tank weapon, and even a suppressed MG. So if they only fire the MG, they're not easier to spot. They're very good, but I only get the Jupiter or the Lynx. So usually people run the Jäger in the Lynx, and then these guys in the TGB for ground. Like for the basic Recon infantry role, and these guys for like sneaking around, or if you want to drop them somewhere, right? Jeeps, yeah, they exist. Nobody likes them. M41A1 used to be busted at 10 points. Now that they're 15 points, they're still fine. By no means a must-take anymore, but they're still solid for 15 points. Again, the stealth helps them with the survivability, and they have okay like infantry DPS. Again, costing 50% more is of course quite a lot, but you can still like flood the map with them essentially. And defensively very good. Yeah. DK1, this thing used to be, I don't want to say meta, but really good. I don't know the exact stats, but I think it had like 70% accuracy, even if I'm not mistaken. It used to be very, very good. It's not bad, but really not that great. It struggles for the price quite a lot against enemy Recon vehicles, right? Still only having 1750 meters range. It's not very good. The accuracy is nice and all, but the APHE don't really. They're not that great for the price. It would need a bit more. I think just a step more range or something might be good enough. Wildcard is just solid. Like a KBA 25 is like a very solid like basic autocannon to have, and at 25 points with 2 armor and good mobility stats is just a solid Recon vehicle. Panzerbill, my beloved, has a very high RPM, low range and HE and AP of course, but it's cheap, it is wheeled, it also has a Browning, don't underestimate that. It's a very fun unit. I love it. I love it. Don't engage anything that can shoot back at you with it though. But it's very, very fun. Love to use it, and especially with the M41 nerfed, you might see it now because it also gives you like a wheeled recon option. And while it can't fire amazingly well, like a 4-stack of those, my enemy isn't paying attention, will be a threat to enemy wheeled openers, and can support your own wheeled openers as a result. Because you don't really get wheeled autocannons, right? As Scandinavia, or wheeled guns. No aim makes sense, no Hachinanas, so Panzerbull is essentially the closest thing you get. And just like the BRDM2, right? Very good mobility, so just sneaking one around can just kill a GPCV somewhere. Or like a Patriot or something similar like that. High value target that can't defend itself. Marinejäger or Sniper Squad, nothing special about them. But as always, right? Sniper Squads, in and of themselves, just have their role. Just be very sneaky for, especially for artillery. You don't really care about the weaponry. You just want them to spot and be very sneaky, and that's what they do. The NM116 is not very good. It's heat, 2 armor, 35 points, and 10 AP heat means, of course, you don't get any additional AP. 7 RPM isn't great. It's not that fast. Don't bother with it. Same with these things. Opklaring and Spiderner. If for some reason you don't want them or can't put them in, they're an option. They also have high availability. If you really care about availability on very good optics, I mean, I guess. But they also have lower HP and are slower and can't defend themselves, or can barely defend themselves. So it means they're also easier to kill. As a result, you lose them more. So the higher availability and lower cost are kind of like, counter acted by that, if you will. I think also exists, I guess. Also, like in the picture, there's like a cover on that thing. Like, what is this, Eugene? It's like a wrong picture, man. Vehicles. There's some neat stuff in there. IKV 103, not necessarily one of those. Again, it's not bad, right? 10 points for 2 armor and like 7 RPM, 3 HE isn't horrible. But it also has a really bad accuracy. The autonomy isn't great. It could be worse, right? It has at least 250, not 200 kilometers. And it's not that great. If you're playing mech, maybe, but it needs a lot more accuracy to be valuable. Heat can be okay. I mean, I guess for this low AP, maybe heat is better. It has actually decent range for its heat rounds, right? So there's that. But the 20% accuracy just oof. IKV 91 is just, I mean, on paper it might not be that bad, right? 20 points isn't the most expensive, not the cheapest. But like for 20 points you get decent range, 9 RPM, 3 HG, and 45% base accuracy with good mobility and 3 armor. Also an infantry version of the KSP. Like on paper, I don't think it's really that horrible. Like in a mech deck, maybe like for some like on elite for some very solid fire support, it's heat, and maybe I'd prefer kinetic, but maybe like with the range and elite heat, it could actually be funny. But it's still just like 3 armor, 20 points with not the craziest of guns is a little bit hard to sell or to buy, I guess. 105 is fun. Like essentially like what you call a tank destroyer, I suppose, even though they're not really used in this timeline anymore, I suppose. Pretty strong gun for the price, like really strong gun for the price. Like even more extreme than the Leopard 1A1 right? Like 16 AP at 35 points, like on almost full range with good speed. Like that thing is fun, right? Get a 4-sec of those and you kill anything in close quarters, right? Vehicle based. But of course, you also get killed very, very fast. Certainly a fun, neat little unit to put into your deck, for sure. Like very good, like light vehicle killer at long range, but you just need to make sure you're at long range, right? Then again, at close enough scaling, you will also start one-shotting things. It's certainly fun if you have the slots, the points for the vehicle tab, definitely worth using. Basic recruit rifle cheap, basic tow cheap, basic tow 2 cheap. Basic tow cheap, of course, not really worth it, right? I'd said it before, for a basic tow to be worth it on a vehicle, like a pure basic tow vehicle carrier, it would need to be something like a 20 point, 4 tubes, 12 missiles with 3 front armor or something, right? At this point, right, it's just not worth it. Tow 2, it's okay, right? It's 5 points more expensive than other Tow 2 Jeeps because you get 6 missiles instead of 4. But it's a Tow 2, right? It's always gonna be like not bad, or like not a bad pick in your deck. Especially, I much prefer these guys over the 1 armored trucks or APCs, because at 1 armor you pretty much die instantly anyway. You're more survivable to like especially mortar strikes with 10 HP, But usually the bigger threat is just tanks driving up to you while you fire at them, tanking the shot and then just one-shotting you, right? And this thing can at least like reverse very fast. And gets to the front line very fast as well. Same story like with again, same story. This is basically the Recon variant without the optics itself. Also like a very good option to just put into your vehicle type. Very good for base defense. Like autocannon spam is one of the best things for base defense, for like all-purpose base defense. Again, a TOW 2 Jeep, but in this case, 4. Also worse off-road speed, right? Off-road speed is quite important for these things, for their survivability, right? Keep that in mind. Reckless Rifle APC. They might be better than the Jeeps, especially with a 10 HP, but then again, they have worse off-road speed. I don't know, man. I'm not a huge fan of either of those. I'd probably go with a Jeep because, again, also an option that gives you better wheel fire. Excuse me. Firepower for your wheel openers. Just gotta keep in mind they have no stabilizers. Talked about this before. 2 front, 2 side is neat, so it doesn't get one shot by anything up to 19 armor, at least kinetic. It has a double tube launcher, so you can fire 2 missiles before it has to reload. Yeah, also like a valid option if you have the slots. But these vehicles are by no means like a must take. They're like the type of vehicles where you're like, yeah, sure, I have the 1 point left, I don't know what else to put in, right? Mech, more of a closer to like a you should take this than in non-mech or moto at least, because of cheaper slots and extra veterancy. Yeah. Ito, not that horrible. Again, Ito carriers are just so like good. Ito carriers are so far and few and far and far and whatever the thing is again, far and in between or whatever, right? They're relatively rare and they so often only come on 1 armored vehicles, right? I want a 2 armor, decent mobility Ito carrier, but there's so few of them, like on AP on boxes, right? There's like the not Norwegian, sorry, the Dutch one, for example, which is fine, but yeah, no, on the one hand, it's 30 points for an Ito, which is actually quite good. But also it's horrible autonomy with only 1 armor, like horrible speed, right? So it dies so easily as well, and it's just hard to retreat with this thing. More Jeeps with reckless rifles. In this case, there's one with 14 AP, but less range, unfortunately. And then the RBS 56 Jeep. On the one hand, right, it has 26 AP. On the other hand, it has the same range as the infantry variant, and as such, it's in range of like full range tank guns. So very hard sell to use this. At 35 points as well, right? Oof. Can't recommend this. Helicopters. Both of the Fenix are amazing. Like 6 HP, very small, which is essentially ECM, right? And 290 kmh is just incredible survivability. The autocannons are very good. Not on a turret, so the entire helicopter has a turn, but it's also only 30 points, right? And the TOW 2 is just very like again, same survivability. Very affordable for 4 TOW 2s. You gotta be careful that they don't get wasted, but both of these are almost must-takes. At least one of those, because the slot only costs 1 point, the first one. If you have 2 slots, definitely put, available, definitely put in both. Like, they're both so good. Fennec 20mm, also very good base defense. We hovered over a forest, and usually you should, especially if the forest is surrounded by like a bit of open area, so you see the stuff coming in close enough so that Fennec will turn on its own preemptively and then shoot immediately. The main problem with non-turreted guns is when you're flying, when you're trying to shoot at something that is like right below you in the forest, or the target is moving away from you, or to the side of you, or it's right next to you, blah blah blah, right? That's when it's awkward, right? But when you're not necessarily under direct threat, or you see the enemy coming and you yourself are stationary, right, and not moving already, then it's a lot more manageable. And these autocannons have insane DPS. Basic tow helicopter, especially for only 50 points less, no. And here you trade 20 kmh and some availability to get an ITO upgrade, right? So this would also be a much better option, but you just use the Fennec too. It's amazing. Last but by no means least, planes. Not nearly as high end as most other coalitions, but it has some good stuff in there. Lansen is not one of those. At least the gun got fixed because it used to have a worse stabilizer, which, if you think about it, makes no. I mean, I guess technically it might make sense in one way, but planes can't be stationary, right, in war games, so they should, for the sake of making sense, be the same, right? So yeah, and not very good napalm plane. It's slow, no ECM, and only 3 bombs. Yeah, like if you really want a napalm plane, at least go for this because it's fast. The Vigan, actually not the worst if it was like too upwetted. 100 points and 30% ECM at pretty fast speed for like a level 26 AP, kind of like a peace shrine. But a peace shrine has a gun, a peace shrine has aim 9 else, a peace shrine has better veterancy, but worse ECM. I'm pretty sure the peace shrine only has 20% ECM. It's not horrible. Sometimes you see it. I think Greyhound likes it. Usually you have better options. Vigan, big baddie of the cluster planes, dropping Thor's hammer. Like, if something is in the center of these bombs, if a vehicle is in the center of these bombs, it will die no matter what. But you only have 4 bombs, so relatively easy to dodge. You're decently survivable, and you have aim 9s, like, or RB-74s. They have some additional utility, but eh. This just doesn't work. Don't bother with this. Also, this does not hit top armor. It's not a laser guided bomb. It hits front armor. If it even hits, it's a mess. This plane. Yeah, nothing can fix this thing. It's like it should die. The Draken WDNS is okay. It looks better than it is kind of in practice. Like, it's one of those things the game doesn't tell you. Essentially, if your plane doesn't have any short range missiles, i.e. is not a multi-role, it flies at a lower altitude, right? Compare the WDNS, for example, the IDS. Mobility, right? Yeah, altitude 750 versus 1000. It flies lower to the ground, easier to kill, dies more often, right? And usually it also means the bombs are a bit tighter, which you don't really want. So yeah, it's not bad. It's not bad. It's just that there's a better option available in this deck. But if I think even if the better option wasn't available, you probably wouldn't use this as much. Because bombers also aren't quite as needed because you usually run a beacon, right? And a beacon somewhat makes up for not using bombers, like AG bombers. F100D might be the rocket pod plane with the highest damage like potential damage output. Keep in mind when you fire position with this thing, it will not use its entire rounds. It will keep circling unless you tell it to evac, right? It will not evac Winchester if you have that turned on. Use one fire position command. It will only use half of its rockets. So either you micro it and immediately give it a second fire position command, or which you can actually use in the same run if you're a bit paying a bit attention, micro it, or you just immediately evac it manually. Okay, keep that in mind. If you right click on a target, it will use all of its rounds, because I'm pretty sure it will not register as a target being dead before the first salvo hits. I'm not sure, but yeah, just keep that in mind when you use it. Not very survivable, but incredibly high damage output against light armor targets or no armor targets. Then again, pretty much any rocket pod will kill like any infantry squad if you right click on it. Maybe the exception would probably be like the North Korean F5, like 40 points or something. It's actually not the worst plane. Like 3 per card, fast, cheap cluster plane. Yes, it's only 2 bombs, but sometimes it's all you need, right? Same with the MiG-29M. Sometimes it's enough to just have some cluster bombs, even if it's 2, because it can somewhat guarantee you to kill off like a low HP tank that's like hiding in a bush or somewhere, right? It can be neat and has like decent multi-role capabilities versus like single helicopters, right? And it's fast, 3 per card, not that expensive. Even if you lose it, not that bad of a plane. The issue is just that usually with planes, unless you like specifically go for a strat like that, you really wouldn't want to use planes like that because plane slots are so expensive. With so few planes per card, using planes, especially like anti-ground planes, are risky to use. You usually want to try to get planes that get a lot of value and multiple runs out of them, unless their individual runs have ridiculously high like potential value, like a Kernus or something in the opener. So yeah, probably the best napalm plane you have in the stack because it's fast and cheap. Not great, but it is what it is. Presumably, probably the best cluster plane in the game. 12 bombs, 20% ECM, decent multi-role capabilities. Yeah, like your nowadays your best and a tank plane in the stack. Took a few years for people to catch on to clusters, but these days you usually use this as your main anti-tank plane. It's obviously different to use in ATGMs, and if you don't like it, that's fine. There's like the MLU you to go for as well, which is great. Um, but clusters, of course, uh, can't properly be protected against by smoke. Block 15 is like your how this might be like the most how would I call this? Uh, it's like the epitome of like these elite ASFs that are 2 card. Probably the most used ASFs out of those. It's like the Mirage 2000, which used to be the prime example of that, but nowadays I think it's a Block 15. Like 2 sets of missiles of 2 each, both of which having 5 HG at least, very fast, elite, blah blah blah, right? It's very, very solid. Just semi-active. Usually you see the Block 15, and sometimes you see people use the F16 as well, which is kind of a worse Block 52 that the Americans have. Same missile loadout essentially, but for 10 points less, you get 1 less HE and 10% less accuracy, and I think a bit less range on your aim-9s. And especially the HE is annoying because it means that 1 hit of each missiles will not kill an enemy plane, right? Unless there's a crit involved, which is annoying, especially at its price range. MLU, also like a backup ASF, like a support ASF, either 2 trained or 1 elite. Like, usually you run 1 elite if you also run a block 5. If you don't run a block 5, I would definitely recommend running 2 trained, because then there's a lot more. You need to rely on it a lot more to kill tanks, and you really would want the second one. And of course, second line support ASF, or if you're running on an elite, like even like almost main ASF, right? Because it's actually the highest veterancy AIM 120s you can get. There's only two other planes with AIM 120s, and it's a Gripen and the F16, and both of them come on hardened. And if you want to run either of them, go for the F16. I know the Gripen is cool and all that. Yes, we all get it. But the F16 has better time over target and Vulcan, right? Which is just better. I'm sorry. Freedom Fighter, it's like a spam rocket plane if you want that. Puff, your only seed. It's a solid plane. It's mediocre seed. It's a bad seed plane, but it's a good multi-role plane. It's a very good helo hunter as well. The gun is essentially Vulcan, or the fire-wise at least. It has the worst potential seed missiles in the game. They still will deal with most radar AA, but having low range, no stealth, and low speed means it's really bad actually at doing its seed role, fulfilling its seed role. But it is somewhat made up for by being a very good like hero hunter as well. Yeah, but it's unfortunately the problem of one of the issues of the stack is just that if you really want just seed, that's unfortunately your only option. I really wanna use these rockets, like these anti-air rockets, but they just don't work. They're so awkward. You get like 3 of them off in a run against helicopters, and you're horrible against helicopters, and you're honestly horrible against planes. I'm sorry, they're funny, but not good. These are basically the same rockets as these guys, right? You get more of them, and you get some, if you want, that's what you want to call them, multi-role capabilities. You can actually get more of them. That's honestly very annoying. Wow. You know what? Yeah, if you want this, just use this instead, because you get 5 rockets, like more planes. Oh, the rockets are actually even a bit bigger. Yeah, that's just mean. Then there's this thing which is kind of like a Lazur. And maybe underrated. Honestly, I see and honestly use it myself very rarely. It's just because you kind of have to run the path, because it's the only seed you get, and then you also have to already have your anti-helicopter role fulfilled more than enough. So there's no real need for a dedicated anti-helicopter plane. Vigan is like the other option versus Block 15, but since the Block 15 also already comes on Elite and at the same availability, For 15 points, you just get some nice stats, right? The long range missiles or medium range missiles are the same, but the short range missiles much better, right? 20% extra accuracy, 700 meters extra range versus planes, and the additional HE. Okay, the HE not that big of a deal, because if you get a second short range missile off, which is when it would matter, you would probably have dealt 2 damage with your gun, even with the gun. But yeah, that's just because usually cheaper SFs then come with higher availability or veterancy, but since both of them are 2 on elite, you'd want to go for the more expensive one because yeah. Japan, same as the F-16AM, but worse. This also used to be ridiculously good, now it's basically dead. To be fair, when it was ridiculously good, it was OP. When they were far and forget top armor hitting missiles with 100% accuracy, basically, was just busted. I'm not gonna lie. I don't know if any of you remember that. Now it's just bad, and it's probably better this way. The other napalm plane option. What's even the difference here? Holy shit! What the fuck? What? Oh, you get one more bomb. That's why, huh? Oh god. Nah, go for the Norwegian one. Save the 50 points. If you want to use such low bomb napalm plane, you probably just want to block one bridge, and this is probably enough. And another Hero 100 that you don't really need. And Landshot maybe. Um, Landshot you also often have the Recon Tiger, right, which helps a bit, but it's not the worst Helo Hunter. Yes, the one of course are a bit worse now that there's worse at killing helicopters or diving helicopters. Now that they're at 1000 kmh, but usually they're still just fine enough, if not just as good. I've found recently. I thought they'd be much worse, but they're actually not. Funnily enough, because usually higher speed planes can have trouble like lining up properly to dive down on helicopters. But yeah, 1.5 hours in or gone. I hope you enjoyed it, and thanks for bearing with me. Jeez, and I will hopefully see you in the next one. Bye bye.